The courtroom stand. The story of Marcus Kane. The courtroom was silent. Judge Marissa Caldwell, a stern-looking woman with sharp eyes and an expression that had weathered decades of legal battles, sighed in frustration. She rubbed her temples before raising her gavel high. "Case dismissed," she announced flatly, slamming the gavel down on the polished oak desk with a resounding crack. The room shifted immediately. The whispers that had filled the air only moments before turned into low murmurs, like the distant rumble of an approaching storm. Every eye seemed to flicker toward the tall, broad-shouldered man standing alone at the defendant's table. Marcus Kane didn't flinch. A former Marine Corps staff sergeant, Marcus was built like a fortress. His weathered face bore the kind of lines that told stories few could stomach, and his piercing gray eyes remained fixed, unblinking. Though his posture was rigid, there was a subtle movement in his jaw, clenching ever so slightly, betraying the storm brewing inside. He had been through combat zones, led his men through gunfire and chaos, and seen death up close. But this, standing in a civilian courtroom, facing a system he once swore to protect, this was a battle of a different kind. "You can't just dismiss my case," Marcus said, his voice calm, but carrying an undertone that resonated through the stillness. It wasn't a plea. It was a statement of fact. Judge Caldwell leaned forward, resting her elbows on the desk. Her patience was clearly wearing thin. "Mr. Kane," she said sternly, "you are not a licensed attorney. You cannot represent yourself in this manner. This court follows strict rules." Marcus raised his chin. "Then let me educate you on those rules." Without breaking eye contact, he reached into his worn leather briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of documents. The edges of the pages were frayed from constant use, and small sticky tabs marked dozens of sections. He laid them neatly on the table with the precision of a man who knew what he was doing. Judge Caldwell scoffed. "Sir, I don't have time for." According to Title 28, Section 1654 of the United States Code, Marcus interrupted smoothly. "Any citizen has the right to represent themselves in court." The murmur in the gallery swelled. A ripple of surprise moved through the courtroom like a gust of wind, disturbing still waters. "You've just made a ruling that directly violates that right," Marcus continued. His voice was unwavering, his tone the kind of compose that often unnerved people who thought they were in control. Judge Caldwell's expression faltered. Her fingers, previously steady, twitched as they hovered above the paperwork. She hesitated, then gave a slight nod to the bailiff. "Bring me those documents." Marcus didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply stepped back, his eyes never leaving the judge as she flipped through the papers. Her face, once carved from stone, began to crack. Her eyes widened as they darted from page to page. "How did you?" she murmured under her breath. The tension in the courtroom was suffocating. Everyone could feel it, the shift, the realization. Judge Marissa Caldwell, one of the state's most respected, unyielding judges, had made a mistake. A grave one. Months earlier, Marcus never imagined he'd be standing in a courtroom like this. After completing his last deployment, he came home thinking his war was over. He just wanted a simple life. He had spent his days working as a mechanic in a small garage on the outskirts of town, fixing engines and transmissions to keep his mind busy. His hands, once steady enough to field strip a rifle blindfolded, now trembled when the world got too loud. He had done everything right, or so he thought, but the world didn't care. One night, driving home after a long shift, red and blue lights flashed in his rearview mirror. He pulled over, confused but compliant. His heart thumped harder than it should have for a routine stop. "License and registration," the officer said. Marcus handed them over without a word. The officer frowned after a brief glance at his records. "Step out of the vehicle." "Is there a problem, officer?" Marcus asked, keeping his voice measured. "You have an outstanding fine from 3 years ago," the officer replied. "Unpaid." "That's impossible," Marcus answered. "I renewed my license 2 months ago. They wouldn't have let me if there was an unpaid fine." The officer shrugged as if he didn't care. "Step out of the vehicle." Marcus sighed and complied. He knew arguing was pointless. What happened next, though, blindsided him. The officer pulled out handcuffs. "Wait, what are you doing?" Marcus asked, stunned. "You have a warrant for failure to appear in court," the officer said. "That's a mistake," Marcus protested. "I was overseas when that court date happened. I have proof." "Tell it to the judge," the officer said, clicking the cuffs around his wrists. And just like that, Marcus Kane, a decorated Marine, was hauled off in the back of a patrol car. It was a clerical error, but it was enough to ruin everything. He sat in that cold, gray holding cell for hours, thinking, not about his case, but about the system he had once believed in, the one he fought to protect. And that was when it began. He would fight. If no one else would fight for him, he would fight for himself. Back in the courtroom, Judge Caldwell cleared her throat. "Mr. Kane," she said slowly, tapping the papers, this is highly unusual. How did you obtain these legal documents?" Marcus met her gaze. "I spent every night for the past 6 months studying," he said, "because no one else was going to save me." The courtroom was dead silent. The judge looked back down at the documents, searching for an error, a loophole. But there was none. Then Judge Caldwell did something no one expected. She leaned back in her chair and exhaled slowly. "Mr. Kane," she said cautiously, "are you telling me you've studied law on your own, without any formal education?" "That's correct, Your Honor." A ripple of astonishment spread through the gallery. Even the bailiff raised an eyebrow. The judge's fingers drummed against the desk. Approached the bench. Marcus walked forward, each step controlled, measured. The judge studied him as if seeing him for the first time. "You do understand that self-representation rarely works in cases like this?" she said, her tone softer but still guarded. Marcus nodded. "I understand that this case should have never existed." A flicker of something, doubt, curiosity, maybe respect, passed through her eyes. The prosecutor, Alan Prescott, stood abruptly. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular," he objected. The case was dismissed. "Mr. Kane is free to go. There's no reason to continue this circus." Judge Caldwell raised a hand. "And yet, I feel I may have dismissed it too soon." She turned back to Marcus. "If I allow you to proceed, do you intend to continue representing yourself?" "Yes." "Very well," she said finally. "Mr. Kane, you may proceed." The gallery erupted in whispers. Marcus turned to face them briefly, then took a breath and began. He laid it all out. The mistake that led to his wrongful arrest, the violation of his rights under the Service Members Civil Relief Act, and the consequences that followed. Losing his job at the mechanic shop. Financial hardship. His name smeared. "This isn't just about me," Marcus said firmly. "This is about how easily the system forgets the people who served it." The prosecutor tried to dismiss it all as procedural error, but Judge Caldwell wasn't having it. "I'm officially reopening this case," she declared. "Court is adjourned until 2 days from now." Marcus exhaled. He had won the first round, but the real fight was about to begin.